The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that hung heavy in the air, making each passing minute feel like an eternity. In the dimly lit living room, the only sounds were the soft ticking of the clock on the wall and the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner. Outside, the moonlight spilled through the cracked blinds, casting long shadows on the worn-out carpet. It had been like this for what felt like forever. This quiet emptiness. The house used to be full of laughter, of love. But ever since Dad left, everything changed. It felt like a part of the world had disappeared, and no one knew how to bring it back. A young child, no older than 10, sat by the window, gazing out into the night. Their small hands pressed against the cold glass as they stared at the stars, searching for answers in the sky. The child's face was soft, innocent, but their eyes, those eyes were filled with confusion, fear, and a quiet sorrow that belied their age. They could hear it, the soft, muffled sobs coming from the other room. Their mother, the one person they still had left in the world, was crying again. She always cried at night, after the child went to bed. At first, they thought it was just a phase. But as the days passed, the crying continued, steady and unrelenting, like a dark cloud that wouldn't leave. The child had tried to comfort her many times, but it never worked. They would sneak into her room and find her curled up in bed, her body shaking with sobs, her face hidden in her hands. They would sit beside her, stroke her hair, and tell her everything would be okay. But deep down, the child knew it wasn't true. Everything had changed when Dad left. They didn't understand why Dad had gone. No one had told them the full story. All they knew was that one day he was there, laughing and playing with them. And the next, he was gone. It didn't make sense. Dad had always been the strong one, the protector, the one who made them feel safe. They had asked their mother what happened. She had told them, in a voice that barely held together, that sometimes people had to leave for reasons they couldn't explain. But the child could see the tears in her eyes, the way her voice trembled when she spoke about him. She wasn't telling the whole truth, and the child knew it. That night, like every other night since Dad left, the house felt colder than usual. The child tried to ignore the gnawing emptiness that settled in their chest. They pulled their blanket tighter around them and tried to focus on the stars outside. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. A sudden sound broke through the silence. A soft creak from the floorboards in the hallway. The child's heart skipped a beat. They knew that sound well. It was the sound of their mother, slowly walking down the hallway, her footsteps heavy with sorrow. She had been walking like that for weeks now, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The child quickly wiped away a tear they hadn't realized had fallen and hurried to the door, peeking out into the hallway. Through the crack, they saw their mother standing by the window, looking out at the dark sky, her back hunched, her hands pressed against the glass. Her face was obscured by the shadows, but the child could see her shoulders shaking. She was crying again. Why does she cry every night? The child whispered to themselves, the question lingering in their mind like a dark cloud. They had asked it before, but no one had given them a straight answer. Was it their fault? Had something gone wrong? Were they not enough to make her smile again? The child stepped quietly into the hallway, their bare feet making no sound against the wooden floor. They tiptoed toward their mother, their heart racing. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight they could make her feel better. As they reached the doorway to the living room, the child hesitated. They couldn't bring themselves to call out to her. Something held them back, something that whispered in their ear that their mother didn't want to be found tonight. Maybe she wanted to be alone with her grief, to let the tears fall without anyone seeing. The child understood that. They understood what it meant to feel lost and alone. But they didn't want their mother to feel that way. They didn't want her to be sad anymore. The child stepped back into the darkness of the hallway and stood there, listening to the sound of their mother's quiet sobs. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to fix it. All they knew was that this pain, the pain that had taken over their house, was something no one seemed able to stop. And then, for the first time in weeks, the child decided to do something. They didn't know what, but they knew they had to try. They couldn't just stand by and watch their mother suffer alone. The child walked back to their room, determination in their eyes. They had to find out what had happened. They had to understand why their father had left, and why their mother couldn't stop crying. They couldn't bear to see her like this any longer. But as they lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, the questions kept swirling in their mind. Why had Dad left? Was it something they had done? Was there more to the story? The child felt the answers were just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of the past. The clock ticked on, marking the passing hours. The child finally closed their eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. They could still hear their mother crying in the other room. The tears, the pain, the unanswered questions. Everything felt so heavy. They had to know the truth. They had to make sense of it all. And so, as the night dragged on, the child vowed that tomorrow they would find the answers. They would learn why their father left. They would discover what had torn their family apart. But little did they know, the truth was far darker than they could ever have imagined. The journey ahead would be one that would change their life forever. A journey into the unknown, where the line between love and loss, safety and danger, would blur in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. The house was filled with an eerie silence once again, but this time it felt different. The child sat in the corner of their room, a small, flickering light from a bedside lamp, casting a warm glow on the faded photographs hanging on the wall. The images seemed to whisper stories of a time before the emptiness, before the tears, before the father's absence. It was as if the photos themselves were trying to bring the past back to life. The child picked up a worn photo frame from the nightstand, their fingers gently tracing the image of a smiling man with bright eyes and a contagious laugh. The man in the photo was their father, tall, strong, and always full of life. In this picture, he was holding the child in his arms, smiling as if the world was perfect, and nothing could ever take that happiness away. The child stared at the image, memories flooding their mind, pulling them back to a time when everything felt safe, secure, and whole. It had been so different then. The laughter, the warmth, the comfort of their father's embrace. It had all seemed so permanent. But now, the photographs were all that remained. The child couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow as they placed the frame back on the nightstand. The world felt incomplete without their father. They remembered the last morning they had woken up to see him. The sound of their father's laughter echoed through the house, filling the air with a warmth that now felt like a distant dream. He had been making breakfast in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with a flair, as if it were a magic trick just for them. The smell of maple syrup and butter had filled the air, making the child's stomach growl with excitement. "Come on, kiddo, you'll miss your pancakes if you don't hurry," their father had called out with a grin. The child had raced to the kitchen, eager to sit at the table and eat the pancakes their father made so perfectly every time. The moment they sat down, their father placed a plate in front of them, a stack of warm pancakes dripping with syrup. He winked, as if sharing a secret, and the child felt loved, cherished, as if nothing in the world could break this moment. But that morning had ended differently from every other day. After breakfast, their father had pulled the child aside, away from their mother, who was still cleaning up the kitchen. He had crouched down to their level, his face serious in a way the child had never seen before. "Listen, buddy," he had said softly, his voice trembling just slightly. "I have to go away for a little while. But it's not your fault. None of this is your fault." The child had frowned, confused by his words. "Why? Where are you going?" "I'm going to make sure everything's okay. There's something I need to do, but I'll come back as soon as I can. You'll be safe, I promise." The child's heart had dropped. They didn't fully understand what he meant, but the way his words hung in the air had made them uneasy. Something didn't feel right. Their mother had stood in the doorway of the kitchen, a look of sadness in her eyes as she watched them. Her lips trembled, and she had quickly turned away, disappearing into the other room. The child remembered the look on her face, the way it seemed to tell a story they couldn't yet understand. The child had wanted to ask more questions. Why was their father leaving? Where would he go? Would he come back? But their father had smiled softly and ruffled their hair, telling them not to worry. And then, just like that, he was gone. The next few days had passed in a blur. The child hadn't understood why their father wasn't coming back, why he was so distant when he called, or why their mother had become quieter and quieter each day. The house felt colder without him, and the silence was unbearable. As time passed, their mother's tears had begun. At first, the child didn't fully understand. They thought that maybe their mother missed their father, but it didn't stop there. The crying continued, night after night, in the dark silence of the house. The child remembered one particular evening. It had been weeks since their father left, and they hadn't heard from him in days. That night, after their mother had fallen asleep, the child sneaked into the kitchen, their heart racing with questions they couldn't ignore anymore. They needed answers. The kitchen was cold and dark, but the child's small feet moved quietly across the floor. They knew where their mother kept the old letterbox, hidden in the corner, under a stack of unopened mail. The child had never dared to look before, but tonight, their curiosity overcame them. They pulled open the box and found a stack of letters, most of them addressed to their mother, written in the familiar handwriting of their father. The child's hands shook as they opened the first letter, reading through the words with a growing sense of unease. "I'm sorry, but I can't keep you safe anymore. I can't protect you from what's coming. I have to do this. You'll understand one day, but for now, please trust me. I'll be back when it's safe." The letter was short, but the words carried a heavy weight. The child's heart pounded in their chest as they read it again and again, each time hoping they had misunderstood. But the truth became clear. Their father hadn't left them because of anything they had done. He had left to protect them from something unknown, something dangerous. The world outside their home wasn't as safe as they thought. The threat was bigger than they could comprehend, something beyond their small, innocent world. Their father had gone to face it, to keep them safe, even if it meant leaving them behind. Tears welled up in the child's eyes as the realization sank in. They had thought it was their fault. They had blamed themselves for their father's absence. But now, they understood. He hadn't left because of them. He had left because of something greater, something no one could explain. The child stood in the kitchen, the letter clutched in their hands, their heart heavy with the weight of the truth. They wanted to run to their mother, to tell her what they had learned, but the words felt too big, too overwhelming. How could they explain it? How could they make sense of a world where their father had to leave to keep them safe? They quietly returned the letter to its place and crept back to their room, the shadows of the night swallowing them up. The answers had only brought more questions. What was this danger that their father had spoken of? What had he been trying to protect them from? And more than anything, why hadn't anyone told them the truth? The child lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, a single tear slipping down their cheek. The house felt even emptier now. The darkness seemed to press in around them, and the silence was deafening. But they weren't afraid anymore. They had to understand. They had to find out what had happened, what had torn their family apart. Tomorrow, they would search for more answers. They would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to bring their family back together. The days had blurred together in the child's mind. Each one seemed the same as the last, filled with silence, unanswered questions, and the heavy presence of grief that seemed to cling to the walls of their home. The child woke up every morning hoping for a change, hoping that maybe, just maybe, things would feel different, feel normal again. But every morning, the same emptiness greeted them, as if the world outside had forgotten what it was supposed to feel like. It had been weeks since the child discovered the truth about their father's departure. They knew now that he had left to protect them from something dangerous, something beyond their understanding. But knowing the truth didn't make the pain go away. It didn't stop the ache in their chest every time they thought about him or the endless nights of crying that their mother endured. The child hated seeing their mother like this, hated seeing her in so much pain, so alone. Every night, after the child went to bed, they could hear the soft, muffled sobs coming from the other room. The child could never quite fall asleep without hearing them. It was as though the sound of their mother crying had become a part of the night itself, something the child couldn't escape. But one night, the child decided they couldn't stand it anymore. They had to do something. They couldn't just sit by and watch their mother suffer in silence. It wasn't fair. She had given them everything. And now it was their turn to help her, to make her smile again, even if it was just for a moment. The child quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake their mother. They crept into the kitchen, where the cold, blue light of the moon filtered through the window. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. The child had an idea. Maybe if they did something special for their mother, she would stop crying. Maybe if they could bring a little joy into her life, just for a second, she would be able to forget the sadness. The child opened the cupboard and pulled out a can of soup. It was simple, nothing fancy, but it was something they could make by themselves. They had watched their mother cook countless times, so they knew how to use the stove, even though it felt strange being in the kitchen alone at this hour. They worked quickly, the smell of the soup filling the air as it heated up on the stove. The child carefully set the table, placing a bowl of soup, a spoon, and a glass of water for their mother. They even folded a napkin into a small, neat square, trying their best to make everything look nice. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Once the soup was ready, the child carefully carried the tray into the living room, where their mother was sitting, staring out the window, her face bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. She didn't notice the child at first, lost in her thoughts, her gaze fixed on something far away. "Mama," the child said softly, their voice trembling with uncertainty. Their mother looked up, startled, her face flushed with surprise and something else, something the child couldn't quite place. The tears that usually stained her face were there again, but they didn't seem as fresh, as raw. They had been replaced by a weary sadness, one that came from weeks of constant grief. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "What are you doing up so late?" "I made you some soup," the child said, holding out the tray with a small smile. "I thought maybe you could eat something." Their mother's eyes softened, but the sadness didn't leave her. She reached for the tray, her fingers trembling slightly. "You're a good kid," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you should be asleep." The child watched as their mother set the tray on the table in front of her, but she didn't start eating right away. Instead, she just sat there, staring at the soup as if it were the answer to all the problems in the world. The child's heart sank as they watched her. They had hoped this small gesture would help, but it seemed like the weight of everything was too much for her to bear. "I know you miss Dad," the child said quietly, sitting down beside her. "I miss him too." Their mother didn't respond at first. She just stared down at the soup, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The child wanted to reach out and comfort her, to take away the pain that seemed to weigh her down, but they didn't know how. How could they make things better when they themselves didn't understand what had happened? How could they fix the world when it was broken in so many pieces? "You don't have to be sad anymore," the child said, their voice barely above a whisper. "Dad's coming back. He said he would." Their mother's hands trembled as she slowly pushed the tray of soup aside. She wiped her eyes, but it didn't stop the tears from falling. "I don't think he's coming back," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "Not the way we want him to." The child's heart ached as they watched their mother's pain. It was a pain that no child should ever have to witness, let alone bear. The mother had always been the strong one, the one who kept everything together, who made sure the family was safe and happy. But now she was unraveling. piece by piece, and the child didn't know how to stop it. "Why did he leave?" the child asked, their voice trembling with emotion. "Why didn't he tell us what was happening?" Their mother took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she spoke. "He left to protect us. From something. Something we don't understand yet. He didn't want us to be in danger. He didn't want you to suffer. He left because he thought it was the only way." The child's eyes widened as the weight of her words settled in. They had always known their father left to keep them safe, but hearing it from their mother made it feel more real, more painful. They didn't fully understand what the danger was, but they knew it was something bigger than them, something that had torn their family apart. "I don't want you to suffer, Mama," the child whispered, a lump forming in their throat. "I want to make it better." The mother pulled the child into her arms, holding them tightly, as if they were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "I don't want you to suffer either," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with sorrow. "But sometimes, we don't have a choice." The child didn't know what to say. They didn't have the words to make everything okay. But in that moment, as they held their mother, they realized something. No matter how hard things got, they would face it together. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but they had each other. And that, for now, had to be enough. The next few days passed in a blur. The child continued to try to help their mother, bringing her little comforts whenever they could. They would leave her notes with simple words of encouragement, even though they knew she wasn't reading them. They would make her breakfast, even if it was just cereal, and sit with her while she ate. But no matter what they did, their mother seemed lost in her grief, and the child, despite all their efforts, felt the weight of the world on their small shoulders. They couldn't fix their mother. They couldn't make everything better. But they didn't give up. They couldn't. There was a quiet strength in the child, a determination to help their mother find a way through the darkness, even if they didn't have the answers themselves. The child's love for their mother was a force that could not be broken, no matter how hard the world tried to tear them apart. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the pain seemed too much to bear, the child clung to the hope that one day, their family would be whole again. The weight of the days had begun to wear on the child. They had tried everything they could to make their mother smile, to take away the pain that seemed to engulf her each night. But despite their best efforts, nothing had worked. Each day felt longer, each night colder. The silence in the house was deafening, and the child could feel it creeping into their heart, growing heavier with each passing moment. It was late one evening when it happened, when the truth, the one thing the child had been avoiding, finally broke through the surface. The truth they hadn't been ready to face, the truth that had been hidden in shadows, waiting to be revealed. It came not with a loud crash or dramatic revelation, but in the softest of whispers, whispers that had been there all along, if only the child had known how to listen. The child had been sitting in their room, staring out the window once again. The moonlight bathed the world outside in a soft silver glow, but inside, everything felt dark. They had heard their mother's soft sobs again, the familiar sound that always made them feel helpless. But this time, the child felt something stirring deep within them. This time, they weren't going to run away from the pain. This time, they would face it. They stood up and walked to the living room, where their mother was sitting, as always, staring into the void. The child hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But they knew they had to try, one last time. "Mama," the child said softly, their voice trembling with uncertainty. Their mother turned slowly, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked at the child, as if seeing them for the first time. Her expression was a mixture of sadness and something else, something like resignation. "Sweetheart, you should be asleep," she whispered, her voice hollow. But the child could hear the exhaustion in her words, the quiet surrender to the overwhelming grief that had consumed her. "I can't sleep," the child said, walking closer to her. "Mama, I need to know. Why did Dad leave? Why did he have to go away?" Their mother's face tightened, a flash of something. Fear, perhaps, crossing her features. She looked away, her hands shaking slightly as she held them together. The child could see the inner battle waging within her. She had never told them the full story, not because she didn't want to, but because she feared it might break them. The child wasn't sure why they were so insistent on hearing the truth. Maybe it was because they had finally reached the end of their rope, or maybe it was because they couldn't stand the weight of the unknown any longer. Whatever the reason, they felt a pull deep in their chest, a need to know, to understand what had truly happened. "Mama, please," the child said, their voice breaking. "I can't keep living like this. I need to understand." Their mother's lips trembled, and for a moment, the child feared she wouldn't speak at all. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of years had finally caught up to her. "I never wanted to tell you this, sweetheart," she began, her voice shaky. "But I suppose you deserve to know. You've been so strong, and you have the right to understand." The child sat down beside their mother, their heart pounding in their chest. "What happened, Mama?" Their mother closed her eyes, and for a long moment, there was only the sound of the child's breath and the soft rustle of the night air outside. And then she spoke the words that would change everything. "Your father didn't leave because of anything you did," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "He didn't leave because he didn't love us anymore. He left because he had to. Because there was something out there, something dangerous, that was coming for us. For all of us. He left to protect us from that." The child blinked, confused. "What do you mean? What danger?" Their mother swallowed hard, her face pale. She looked at the child, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, there was a spark of something. Something like hope, like a shared understanding, flickering in her eyes. "The world we live in, it's not what it seems," she said slowly. "There are things happening, things beyond our control, things that threaten our safety. Your father, he was part of something bigger than us. He was trying to protect us from forces we don't even fully understand." The child felt a chill run down their spine. They had always known there was something strange about their father's departure, something he hadn't explained, something he hadn't told them. But hearing their mother speak these words, hearing the weight in her voice, made the truth feel so much heavier than they had imagined. "The day he left," their mother continued, her voice trembling, "he made a promise to keep us safe. He had to go into a dangerous place, a place where he couldn't bring us. He didn't want us to get hurt, and he didn't want you to see the things he had to face. So he left. Not because he wanted to, but because it was the only way." The child's mind was spinning. But why didn't he tell us everything? Why didn't he explain? Their mother wiped away a tear. Because it was too dangerous. Because there are things out there, things you can't even begin to imagine. He wanted to protect you from them. He thought if you knew, you'd be scared. He thought it was better if you didn't understand. He didn't want you to carry that burden. The child sat in stunned silence, trying to process the weight of their mother's words. Everything they had thought they knew, the reason their father left, the sense of abandonment, the pain that had been tearing their family apart, was all different now. Their father hadn't left because of something they had done. He hadn't left because he didn't love them. He had left because there was something far greater at stake, something that had forced him to make the hardest decision of his life. "I don't want to lose him," the child whispered, their voice cracking. "I don't want to be without him." Their mother wrapped her arms around the child, holding them tightly as the weight of the truth settled over them both. "I know, sweetheart. I know. But your father's doing this for us. He's doing it because he loves us, and he's trying to keep us safe. One day, he'll come back. And when he does, we'll be ready." The child clung to their mother, tears welling up in their eyes as they finally understood. The pain hadn't gone away, but it had shifted. It was no longer a question of abandonment, but of love, a love so strong that their father had made the ultimate sacrifice to protect them. As they held each other in the quiet, dark room, the child felt a new sense of hope growing inside them. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers they couldn't yet comprehend. But for the first time in a long while, they felt that they were not alone. They had each other, and they had the knowledge that their father's love was still with them, even if he wasn't physically there. The mother kissed the child's forehead, her voice soft and full of reassurance. "We will be okay. We will always be okay, as long as we have each other." The child nodded, feeling the warmth of their mother's love wrap around them like a shield. They didn't know what the future would bring, but they knew they were stronger than they had been before. They had the truth now, and with it, the strength to face whatever came next. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, their father was watching over them, keeping his promise, and waiting for the day when they would all be together again.